Hello. Welcome, everyone. My name is Thomas. I am an organizer with Food and Water Watch, and I hope you all are here for the national premiere of the new film, Dear President Biden. We will get started in just a few minutes. We've got hundreds of people joining us live, and really excited to share this new film and speak with many of the leaders and activists that are featured in the film. As we give it just a couple more minutes for people to join, a couple quick technical things. If you need to turn on closed captioning, there should be a button on YouTube just labeled CC in the lower part of the screen, the lower right, I believe. And many folks are already in the chat. If you are logged into a Gmail or a YouTube account, you can join us in the chat. We'll be sharing some links there as well, so you don't have to log in, you don't have to join. But if you want to say where you're joining us from, or put a comment or a question in there, that is an option as well. Alrighty. So again, my name is Thomas. I am an organizer with Food and Water Watch, and we're here for the premiere of Dear President Biden. So we're here to learn and hear the stories of leaders in the fossil fuel resistance movement from all different parts of the country, hear why and how it's so important for President Biden to use his authority, all of his authority, to fight the climate crisis and end the era of fossil fuels. I have had the privilege of working with many of the people featured in the film and with the director, Jon, to put it all together and to share these stories with you. So we're really excited that folks are joining us here tonight, and we'll, like I said, get to see the film and hear from many of the folks featured. But really, this is about organizing, building power, engaging our communities to hold President Biden accountable to his climate promises, to continue the work of opposing fossil fuel projects that endanger communities and our water and our health and our climate. So again, thank you all for joining. I am going to turn it over to Jon Bowermaster for just a quick introduction before we start the film.
It's very funny. Hello, Thomas. I'm assuming you can hear me even though you can't see me, which is kind of funny.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, as long as you can hear me, it's okay. I don't really need to be seen, but Kate just sent a note saying, I see your bookcase, but I don't see you. But I'm sitting here at some kind of virtual mystery. Anyway, I can give the intro without you having to look at my face. Well, you know, as this show came up, I saw it referenced as a virtual premiere, which it is, but it's also a world premiere. I mean, no one other than the editor and myself and a few people have actually seen the film. So it's actually very fun for me to know that you guys are going to get to see it. I'm thrilled that all of many of the people who are in the film are going to join us afterwards, because I was so impressed traveling around the country. You know, this is the fourth in my series of Dear films. We started with Dear Governor Cuomo, which is focused on the fracking issue. We made Dear President Obama, which looked at some of the, his kind of all the above energy strategy, which we didn't necessarily agree with. And then Dear Governor Brown, which looked at Jerry Brown and his traveling around the world and telling people not to drill for fossil fuels while California was drilling 300 new wells a month. So I'm thrilled that this thing is done. I think it looks great, sounds great. I think the message is great. And, I often say that in this environmental work that we all do, it's kind of sometimes hard to find optimism and hope. But I think the people who tell this story tonight and who you're going to meet and listen to after the film is over are representative of why we should find hope and optimism, because these are all really great, fantastic people. So, yeah, we'll figure out how to get me back on camera, but I'm actually happy not to be seen. And I'm looking forward to seeing the film myself. I think we did a little poll. I don't think any of the participants who are joining tonight have seen the film either. So it's going to be fun for all of us.
Bringing it all together live. Great. Well, without further ado, I think we can kick it off.
Every single family has cancers. Every single family in our tribe. Cardiovascular diseases. Our babies walk with these little asthma inhalers in their pockets and share them with each other, but they forget to take their own. Autoimmune diseases, because of what goes on with the air, the water, and the earth there. We will resist because we exist. We will continue to exist because we resist.
We are the protectors.
It's not about what we can do in the next 10 years anymore.
This has actually hit the United States extremely severely, even in Biden's first year.
The world is hurtling towards climate chaos.
We have alternatives to this.
That's why it's so important for the president to really declare the climate emergency.
He could do that with a stroke of a pen. We are suffering and we are dying.
And this has really woken us up. It has pulled us together.
And if we do not stand up to the political calculus,
we're going to lose everything.
So I'm here because scientists are not being listened to. And we've been trying to warn you guys for so many decades that we're heading towards a catastrophe. And we've been being ignored. The scientists in the world have been being ignored. And it's gotta stop. We're gonna lose everything. And we're not joking. We're not lying. We're not exaggerating. This is so bad, everyone.
On April 4th, the IPCC Working Group 3 report from their 6th assessment was released, and it said what we've all known for a very long time, which is that we need to have a complete moratorium on all new fossil fuel infrastructure right now. And that's even just to have a coin toss chance of staying under 2 degrees Celsius, which in my opinion will be catastrophic. And yet, leaders of the world are still working as fast as they can to expand fossil fuel infrastructure, taking us 180 degrees in the wrong direction where we need to go, deeper and deeper into the climate catastrophe. I cannot stand for this as a scientist. I cannot stand for this as a citizen. I cannot stand for this as a father. And I am willing to take that risk, to risk arrest for this beautiful planet and for my kids. Every day we wait, every year we wait, every presidential cycle that we wait to take action locks in more loss irreversibly to our Earth's life support systems, to biodiversity, to humans around the world, especially the most vulnerable. So at some point, we're going to need leaders who are courageous enough to take a stand.
If the Obama presidency represented a lost 8 years to start transitioning off fossil fuels, the Trump administration sent us spinning headlong on an even worse course. As a candidate, Joe Biden promised a change in direction.
We're going to vastly cut down on the amount of fossil fuels that we use.
I will no longer fund oil companies with subsidies.
We'll bring America back into the Paris Agreement and put us back in the business of leading the world on climate change again.
And appealing to potential voters, laid out a plan to address the climate crisis that included key commitments to stopping all new drilling on federal lands and ending fossil fuel subsidies. He talked about moving off oil and towards a renewable energy future, and said repeatedly that he regarded climate change as an existential threat, one he would make a priority if elected. Once in office, President Biden took some encouraging early steps, shutting down the Keystone XL pipeline and re-entering the Paris Climate Agreement. But as the months went by, his administration returned to business as usual by embracing an all-of-the-above energy strategy that included new fossil fuel projects, new pipelines, and unproven industry schemes marketed as climate solutions, like so-called carbon capture.
We're going to get rid of the $40 billion fossil fuel subsidies, and we're going to invest it in clean energy and carbon capture.
To build more infrastructure to receive LNG, and to take steps to increase the efficiency of gas.
With slim margins in both House and Senate, and particularly troublesome representatives from coal countries standing in the way, Congress has managed to slow both new proposals and funding for programs and budgets intended to help reduce the impacts of climate change. The administration also greenlighted the largest oil and gas lease in U.S. history, offering more than 80 million acres in the Gulf of Mexico for drilling, which could, over coming decades, produce 1 billion barrels of oil.
We're approaching a record levels of oil and gas production in the United States, and we're on track to set a record of oil production next year.
For the moment, the courts have blocked the lease.
The UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, literally said, this is an atlas of incredible human suffering, as well as an indictment of the failure of climate leadership. That is encapsulated in President Biden's continued commitment for oil and gas. And that has to stop. That is the one spigot that has to turn off if we're really going to transition to the renewable energy future we need.
I don't get the sense, unfortunately, that he as a human being understands where we're heading and just what it's going to mean for the people of the world if we stay on this course and keep burning fossil fuels. We could see billions of deaths. This feels to me like the last moment.
People over here have cancer. The lady in that second house back there, she died with cancer. Then a few months later, her husband died with cancer. One of our friends, he lived across the street from this facility, and he died with respiratory issues. It's sad, though. It's really sad to see what's going on.
Sharon Levine lives in the same community where she was born, in Welcome, Louisiana, in St. James Parish. The former special ed teacher turned environmental activist lives just a mile from her birthplace alongside the Mississippi River, a neighborhood in the center of Cancer Alley. The 85-mile stretch from Baton Rouge to New Orleans, where oil, gas, and petrochemicals hang heavy in the air, and residents are 50 times more likely than the national average to get cancer.
The parish officials voted for this area to be industrial. They did that in 2014 without the citizens of St. James knowing that they were doing it. And then when they sold our high school, sold our post office, and built this other plant, that's when I found out about it. So I had to make a choice.
In 2018, she thought her hard-working days were behind her, until she learned of a $1.25 billion plastics manufacturing plant about to open next door. One that would have generated 1 million pounds of liquid hazardous waste every year.
And I believe that every American has a fundamental right to breathe clean air and drink clean water. But I know that we haven't fulfilled that right. No, we haven't fulfilled that right for a generation or more in places like Cancer Alley in Louisiana.
Armed with little more than statistics and tenacity, Sharon rallied her neighbors under the banner of Rise St. James and led the fight to deny the permits, which in 2019 they were. But despite their early successes, Sharon Levine and her Rise St. James neighbors are again feeling threatened, thanks to the announcement of a $10 billion Formosa Plastics plant that hopes to be built just 2 miles from her home.
Formosa plant would be 14 small plants inside the big complex. That's too much for any human being to breathe. They're going to make plastics. And the chemicals being used to make plastic are cancer-causing. And plus, they're going to pollute the river, our drinking water, even more. They don't care. They don't care about the people. They care about the profit. But it don't go to the citizens. It goes to the industry. but they want to make us a sacrifice so they can make their billions and millions of dollars. When they wanted to approve this plant to come into this district on the East Bank, a predominantly white community, they voted no for it. When they say put it in no 5th district, oh yes, all of them voted for it. Because you know why? Nobody would say a word in the 5th district. Nobody would even speak up in the 5th district until RISE came into existence. Politicians have let us down. They don't care about us. They're not trying to protect us. And the people in St. James look up to RISE St. James to help. We can't solve all the problems. We are suffering and we are dying. And I want to let President Biden know what's going on firsthand, not from the politicians, from the citizens of St. James. And I think once he see it firsthand, I think he's going to do something about it. I really feel like that.
The oil and gas industry is sort of the biggest Goliaths there are, and seems they're able to pull the strings and get their bidding done through our democratic institutions. So what I see happening is this kind of David and Goliath battle with all of us as the Davids taking on the fossil fuel Goliaths kind of for control over our democratic system. And so we are building a slingshot made out of good science that shows us what we can do, love for our children and for the planet, and then kind of grassroots political savvy. We can't desist, right? We're protecting life itself. We're protecting the only habitable home that we have. And so we just keep fighting.
Booker T. Washington said, cast down your bucket where you are. In other words, do what you can where you are. You don't have to worry about being Greta Thunberg. You don't have to even worry about being John Beard. God knows we don't need too many of us. But we need to be the best person we can be. We need to do our part. But we can't let money drive us. It's got to be about the people. There's too much suffering going on.
John Beard was born in Port Arthur, Texas, gas and oil refining capital of the United States, and worked in the petrochemical industry for 38 years. Today, he still lives in Port Arthur and heads the Port Arthur Community Action Network, in the same neighborhood where he grew up, refusing to leave, despite the heavy, ever-present smell of oil and gas in the air. Coming from within the industry, in the past few years, Beard has become a leading voice against fossil fuel expansion, though living in the heart of a community that extracts a fortune from oil and gas refining.
It's carcinogenic compounds. It's compounds that are toxic. And how much of that are you going to breathe every day without there being some toxic or chronic effect on your health? And people seem to ignore that and tell you it's about jobs. You have a population of a city of 55,000, 2/3 of which are considered economically disadvantaged. Average income here is $35,000 a year. His average home value here is less than $60,000. So in spite of all the wealth that the petrodollars bring, the expansions that come here, the constant expansions and the constant programs that are saying, we're going to hire Port Arthur people, we're going to create jobs, the jobs don't go here. Should we be sacrificed so America can have oil and gas when we can do this in a better way? We have to transition away from this toxic fossil fuels, because if we don't, then we're all going to be stuck breathing this air. We're all going to be stuck with sea level rise and bigger, more impactful storms, more fires out west, more flooding in the coastal areas. You're going to have more cancer clusters, more diseases that are happening that we don't have any solution to. We're all going to be stuck with not having the type of jobs or quality of life for our children, children's children that we want to see happen. No more expansions, no more pipelines, no more gas terminals, no more oil exports. You can't do it. There's too much suffering going on. Another world is possible. The question is, do we have the courage and the will to make that world come into existence? And we're going to have to do it, or else we won't have this world any longer.
The fossil fuel party is over now, and these guys need to be evicted because they are posing a national security threat. They're upending our ability to have pollination, which drives our food system. We won't be able to do farming. Fresh water is becoming unavailable. All these kind of basic things that we need to run a civilization are under threat. And it's the job of the federal government to look out for the well-being of the citizenry. And I would say that one of our two major parties is actively destroying those things, and the other is not really rising to defend them with this kind of speed and single-minded purpose that's required in this moment.
The boom in liquefied natural gas plants, monstrous facilities that receive gas by long bomb trains traveling across the country and liquefy it on site so that it can be loaded onto massive transoceanic ships, is thanks to rules changed under President Obama that allowed U.S.-produced gas and oil to be exported. War in Ukraine has elicited mixed messages on the energy front from the Biden administration. The fact that Europe remains addicted to Russian oil and gas opened the door to the possibility of pushing for renewable energy expansion. Instead, President Biden's first call was for American fossil fuel companies to ramp up production and encouraged new liquefied natural gas plants to be built for export.
We're going to work to ensure an additional 15 billion cubic meters of liquefied natural gas, LNG, for Europe this year. To accomplish this, the European Commission is going to work with the member states to store gas across the continent, to build more infrastructure to receive LNG.
There is nothing temporary about a build-out of new LNG terminals. Once billions of dollars have been sunk into new pipelines and refineries, and the oil and gas are flowing, companies and petrostates will have every incentive to keep them going. Most of these new plants will just be hitting their stride in 2050, the year we're supposed to be off fossil fuels.
Instead of the Biden administration slowing down or doing everything that they could within their power to at least slow walk leases, they ended up going the exact opposite direction and have actually leased more oil and gas permits than the Trump administration to date.
The United States has become the #1 extractor of oil and gas from the ground and the #1 exporter of natural gas and crude oil in the world. And that's a shameful fact. And it's the liquefied natural gas that makes that possible. The way to get gas across the ocean to foreign markets is different because gas takes up a lot of room when it's a vapor, right? So you need to squish it into a liquid. And to do that, you have to build a whole power plant. So that requires lots and lots of energy and lots of emissions on top of what you're already getting from fracking it out of the ground, right? The LNG export market is really what's driving the whole train now. It's kind of the tail that wags the dog.
Today, there are more than 110 LNG facilities up and running on America's coastlines, with a demand for more. Projects like this in Miami, built by New Fortress Energy, are part of our growing coastal skylines. New Fortress would like to build a similar plant in the tiny community of Gibbstown, New Jersey, which sits on the Delaware River just beneath the Philadelphia airport. For the moment, permits have not been granted. A Trump-era rule allowed bomb trains carrying highly explosive gas to travel through densely populated cities. So far, the Biden administration has only temporarily suspended the rule, rather than deny it. The Gibbstown plant is delayed, but still hoping for permits which would allow it to move forward. The proposed plant in Gibbstown is an environmental justice fight. The trains carrying highly explosive gas would run through some of the poorest neighborhoods in New Jersey and Philadelphia, through communities that, thanks to poverty, do not have the resources, extra time, or knowledge to fight back. If or when there are accidents, derailments, explosions, leaks, it is those same low-wealth neighborhoods on the front lines that would pay the heaviest costs.
Every time you have a project that's susceptible to doing damage, it's always passed to the poorest of neighborhoods because you see me as an inferior person. You don't see me as your equal. If you saw me as your equal, you wouldn't be treating me this way.
Fairman Morales, native of Puerto Rico, has been a union electrician in Philadelphia for more than 30 years. He lives in North Philly, home to some of the most impoverished urban neighborhoods in the city, if not the country. Fairman is a spokesman for the group Philly Boricua, which lobbies for fair treatment of Philadelphia's Latino population.
I am in a place called Taller Puertorriqueño. It is the cultural heart of the Puerto Rican community. This is where you will learn about our history, about our struggles, and about our culture. This is an extremely poor community. If you were to walk around here, you are going to see a lot of homeless people. You're going to see a lot of people trapped on drugs and in the escape, as we say. And you're going to see a lot of people that are just living day to day, you know, paycheck to paycheck. But it's a beautiful neighborhood in terms of the people that you see that there's a lot of people that care about each other, are family oriented. And we only need one accident. That's all we need. It only takes one little small ignition for this to blow. And most people can't escape this. You just can't transport something by train from 200 miles through all these areas where it's heavily populated with people that are poor who can't really move anywhere and not realize all the damage that can be done. It will pass through areas where there's hospitals, where there's universities. In general, there's 200,000 people that live in this area in Philadelphia. Then it will go through the city of Camden, New Jersey, which is one of the poorest cities in all of the United States, and then it will reach Gibbstown.
The terminal's right down the street and next to a daycare, in fact. And their plan is to export liquefied natural gas, or frack gas, and to export it outside of the country so it will not be for American use.
Kate Delaney was born in southern New Jersey, where she and her family still live. She's now an organizer with Food and Water Watch, monitors goings-on in and around the Gibbstown LNG site, and tries to rally neighbors to realize the potential dangers rolling through their backyards.
This would not be by special rail cars. This would just be existing rail cars, major highways, and through various communities. And the public doesn't even know that this is happening. And it's by schools, it's by nursing homes, it's by, natural areas that we want to protect. It is highly volatile, and if there was an accident somewhere along the route, then they would need to evacuate for a 2-mile radius. And again, people don't even know that this is going to be in their backyard.
Neighbors of the proposed location on the Delaware River across from Philadelphia are used to living near threats. The site previously housed a DuPont plant that manufactured dynamite.
I don't think that they would try and put this in, a more affluent community. They would expect people to ask questions. They would expect people to be maybe paying closer attention to what elected officials are up to. And I think maybe working class people don't have the availability to get to those meetings or don't have maybe the history of engaging in that way. Gloucester County is quickly becoming kind of a dumping site of dangerous projects where we have less money. It's definitely more working class. And I think, it's an economic justice issue.
There is an incredible exploitation that is in this capitalist system that we're living in right now. Black, brown, indigenous, Asian, other communities of color live far more near a fossil fuel plant and are polluted far more disproportionately than white families. The president needs to deal with that.
We have to continue to stand up for the dignity and sovereignty of tribal nations.
I mean, just because the administration hasn't done anything doesn't mean that they can't in the future. The president can stop LNG export terminal permits, fracking and drilling permits, stop investing billions and billions of dollars in fossil fuel infrastructure. There are just so many ways that they can challenge the fossil fuel industry. And what I think it's going to take is continued work by concerned citizens who are going to press President Biden to do what he should do.
And with the power of a pen, he could stop Dakota Access. And with the power of a pen, he could stop Line 3, and stop Line 5, and stop Mountain Valley Pipeline, and stop all this stupid fracking. He promised us as indigenous people that he would listen to us.
On his first day in office, President Biden revoked the permit needed to open the Keystone XL pipeline. A half-built pipeline project already under construction in Virginia. The Mountain Valley Pipeline is years behind schedule, billions of dollars over budget, and deserves the same fate as the XL Keystone project. to be shut down. Former military analyst and co-chair of Protect Our Water Heritage Rights, Russell Chisholm, explains that the MVP project should never have been started in the first place, is being built along the border of a national forest, and is simply unnecessary. Today, even according to its builders, the project is only 55% complete. Yet, citing the impetus created by the war in Ukraine, local politicians, including Senator Joe Manchin, have been pushing for the pipeline to be finished immediately. Lack of permits keep the project stalled, for now.
Folks have come to understand environmental justice issues everywhere in a different way. For example, how treaty rights are often trampled to build some energy project, or in the name of economic development, how Black, brown, and indigenous communities are saddled with all numbers of environmental injustices that disregard that human toll. Everything downstream has to be taken into account too. Our local reservoirs around here are groundwater sources. This is karst terrain. That means caves and caverns that store some of the cleanest water anywhere in the world that people and their livestock rely on for their households, for their families. So it's really hard to put a measure on all of that. And we can report erosion and sediment control violations. We can make sure that the builders are doing everything necessary to protect those sources, but we watch time and time over where that fails. In every decision that Biden makes as an executive, climate should be at the front of the conversation. And if you listen to the scientists, it's not about what we can do in the next 10 years anymore. It's about what we need to be doing right now. And that again comes back to a project like this at 99.999% complete can never be shipping methane downstream. Our communities have been devoted to stopping this over 7+ years. And a small group of people fighting for each other can really change the direction of our energy needs, the conversation around energy, the conversation about worker rights, all of that. It can't just be from us. We don't have the power of somebody like Joe Biden. It starts with him. We've carried the load, and I think we're ready to hand it off to somebody with that level of power and control to join us.
He said that he was going to make climate change one of the big issues of his administration. And instead, we have seen so many things that are the opposite of what he promised. I mean, there's so much that he could do. He could use his bully pulpit to talk about climate change constantly. He could call for a climate emergency. There's no doubt that we need congressional action on fossil fuels. But even without congressional action, the president can use his executive authority, the courts, his agencies, to do so much to move us off of fossil fuels and to really make climate change the priority of his administration. It is the existential threat. He was right. He needs to act like it.
We push solutions off to the future and assume that if we have economic growth, we're going to invent some more technology that will get us out of whatever problem this technology created. And those politicians who think that we can push this off to the future have not lived through the tornado that tore off their roof. They have not lived through the last flood that have destroyed their town. We can't do that. And I assert that there is a different theory of government that we must adopt.
Perhaps the most insidious of the energy plans promoted by the Biden administration, in particular by Secretary of Energy Jennifer Granholm, is a new technology known as carbon capture.
By capturing and storing carbon dioxide from polluting sources, we can make real progress in tackling the climate crisis and in moving toward a clean energy future.
It's a positive-sounding solution, heavily promoted by the fossil fuel industry, akin to natural gas or fracking, which on the surface can be made to sound appealing. But carbon capture is just another way for the fossil fuel industry to profit, by producing more carbon emissions and cleaning up nothing.
So what carbon capture and storage is a complex set of machines that is attached to a smokestack where carbon dioxide is being emitted, and it captures that CO2.
We've got to decrease carbon emissions across our economy and remove CO2 from the air at the same time.
And typically what runs carbon capture and storage machinery are gas-fired turbines. So you're fracking more gas out of the ground to run the turbines to capture the CO2, but the accounting doesn't count for the methane, which is even a more powerful greenhouse gas than the carbon dioxide. That just gets a pass. In order to take that carbon somewhere and sequester it, you have to put it in a pipeline. So more energy is now going to be used to turn the gaseous CO2 into a liquid.
Then we take that carbon and we reliably store it in deep underground geological formations.
And so if it should find naturally occurring fractures and fissures, which we know from fracking are down there, right? And enters our groundwater aquifers, which lie above, again, CO2 is going to turn into carbonic acid and acidify people's drinking water supply. The same phenomenon happens in those pipelines. If there's any water at all, it turns into acid and can eat the pipeline away. You can have a rupture of a pipeline, and we've seen it happen in a place called Satartia, Mississippi. It's colorless, it's odorless, it's CO2. People started having seizures, they were falling down. All the ambulances, they sputtered to a stop because combustion engines also need oxygen to run, not just people, right? And then here's like the thing that adds insult to injury. 80% of the carbon that's captured isn't actually stored in a vault somewhere. It's used to get more oil out of the ground.
Carbon capture and storage is an important tool we need to decrease our carbon emissions and to reach our net zero carbon emissions goal by 2050.
Carbon capture and storage is always a net positive for carbon dioxide going into the atmosphere, not even counting the methane. So none of the accounting works, none of the math works. The public health risks are terrifying. And then in the end, we're just using it to get more oil out of the ground. It is an idea that was invented by the fossil fuel industry for the purpose of getting more oil out of the ground. It's not a solution. It shouldn't be accepted as a solution. Why is our White House listening to the fossil fuel industry's proposals for how to solve stuff instead of the scientists who say, hey, wait a minute, not so fast, this doesn't even work?
Currently, there are a trio of pipelines, ranging from 350 to 2,000 miles long, proposed to carry carbon across Iowa, a state where otherwise there are some good energy stories, like the fact that it gets more than 57% of its electricity from wind. While the three pipeline builders battle for public opinion and simultaneously try to buy politicians to sign on, there is a growing movement of Iowans against these projects. Not every Iowan is convinced, especially those who risk losing their land to eminent domain, a constant threat.
So we were told, oh, this is good for Iowa, that we're on your side, we're an agriculture company. And what we have seen is they're only in it for their private property. And the landowners know that this is a terrible idea. And we know that from experience here in Iowa. So we had the Dakota Access Pipeline come through, and the land was destroyed, and the land has not recovered. And what's so fascinating to me about this particular proposal is that it has brought together the really unusual bedfellows in the Midwest who have made common cause with these landowners and with indigenous people. We don't all see eye to eye on much of anything, but here's where we do see eye to eye. We believe in fairness because it's not good for Iowa. It's not good for landowners and farmers. It's not good for the environment.
We're all of one mind, and the mind is that we love our land.
Jessica Wiskus, a classically trained musician and academic researcher, lives with her husband and 9-year-old daughter, a farm field away from where one of the pipelines would be buried.
When these land agents come in from the pipeline companies, they're offering us some payments for the land that they see on a property deed. But they disregard the gift of the land. They disregard what the land truly means to us. Those easements will have the pipe in the ground forever. There is no plan ever to, take them out again. So it would be in there for my generation and my daughter's generation, my grandchildren's generation. And so these projects to us, they touch the very core of who we are, and it has united us as a community. This fight isn't really just about me as an individual. It's not about my neighbor as an individual. It's about how we belong to the land. And our voices don't often get heard on a national level. We've gone to the public meetings. My neighbors and I have showed up. We've talked to our local representatives, our representatives, our senators. We've gone to the Board of Supervisors. Our government has failed to hear what we truly care about and has failed to respect who we truly are and what motivates us, that we have been disregarded and what we truly love, what we truly care for, has simply been written off.
Dear President Biden.
Dear President Biden.
Dear President Biden.
Dear President Biden.
Earth breakdown is the single biggest threat facing humanity and our entire planet right now.
We have to change the direction we're going. We cannot afford to ignore the scientists.
Anything fossil fuels can do, renewable energy can do better. Please redirect our nation toward a renewable future.
We need one world leader to step up to the plate right now and turn this whole thing around.
I'm asking you to be a thinker. I'm asking you to be a progressive. I'm asking you to move away from what's destroying the earth.
Need a fossil fuel-free future. Please take action.
We need you to lead on climate, live up to your climate promises.
You have the power to do it.
You can block any future funding for carbon capture and storage and fund real climate solutions.
Not for my sake, but for the next generation and the generation after that.
Please look into your soul. Listen to the scientists for real. You have so much power and you could make such a huge difference.
You said it was an existential threat. Start acting like it. Take action now.
Be the climate president you said you were going to be. Do the right thing. Make the call, Joe.
Dear President Biden, declare a climate emergency now and use all of your executive powers to stop the fossil fuel era and rebuild with a regenerative, just, and renewable future that we need.
Alrighty. Wow. I've heard from a lot of those people, seen some of those clips before, but it's really powerful to hear all those stories together. Well, thank you all again for joining. We have looks like 350 plus people joining us live, which is really, really exciting. So for the next 45 minutes or so, we have the gift of hearing more from some of the people featured in the film. And I will just start by saying that every one of these folks you saw is a really integral part of this movement that many of us are a part of, working locally and at the state level and at the national level to oppose fossil fuel projects, to protect our communities in every way that we can. So really, really thankful for the work that all of us are doing day to day, and for the time that folks are offering us this evening. I'm going to start with Joy. Joy Braun with the Indigenous Environmental Network, going to come up. Hi, Joy. So folks saw in the film, I think, reference to a coalition. We saw some protests in DC. Joy's been one of the leaders of this coalition. So Joy, do you want to tell everyone more about the People versus Fossil Fuel Coalition and the work that we've all been doing together?
Sure. Chante Washte Nape Chiuza Happy Wambly Wiakawi Imachi Happy. My name is Eagle Feather Woman, or Joy Braun. I'm with the Indigenous Environmental Network. I'm the National Pipelines Organizer for IEN. I'm also on the steering committee for the People versus Fossil Fuels, formerly Build Back Fossil Free. Yeah, I already switched over the name. Anyway, but I wish you all a good day and a hearty handshake. People versus Fossil Fuels came together just before Biden took office. He was still running for president. And the discussion started then about forming a coalition of frontline organizers and other organizations to come together and really challenge what had happened during the previous administrations regarding fossil fuel development. Right now, it started out with about 200 organizations and frontline groups. Now we have over 1,200 organizations and frontline groups. This is largely led by Indigenous and BIPOC and communities that are really truly on the front line. You've seen John Beard, you saw Cheryl Levine, you saw Carolyn Raffensperger here in this movie. There's also Indigenous communities and Latino communities, Hispanic communities, and poor Black communities, and places that have really been targeted by the fossil fuel industry. And the People versus Fossil Fuels came together to really challenge the Biden administration to declare a climate emergency. Now, I fought the Keystone XL pipeline for well over 10 years, and I was on the front line when it came to Dakota Access Pipeline. I was the first camper up there at Standing Rock, along with my cousin, Wiaka Eagleman. And some of the things that we learned during that fight is we needed to build alliances. We needed to build co-conspirators. We needed to build each other up. That unity through diversity truly helps us win these fights. And we need to hear from the frontline people. We need to hear from the people who are directly impacted. And that's what People versus Fossil Fuels is about. So yes, we're challenging the build out of fossil fuel development, pipelines, LNG projects, all of that ugly, nasty stuff, refineries. But we also want President Biden to declare a climate emergency and to make sure that we're challenging the increase in leasing, fossil fuel leasing, oil leasing, not only in the Gulf, but also in the Arctic and also onshore as well. So that's a big push with People versus Fossil Fuels. This is a large coalition of amazing people that have come together to help fight in unity to make sure that we have a future, not only for ourselves, but for the next 7 generations. Wopi Latanka Gitiapi.
Thanks so much, Joy. Very, very well put. A great summary. There's much more that could be said, I think, about the work we've done over the last year and a half or so. But that's what this all is. It's day to day. It's too much to capture in any one film or an evening like this. But it's a good little snapshot of the important work that's going on. I want to pose a question now to my colleague Kate in New Jersey. Kate, we heard a little bit about the Gibbstown project and a reference to a rule or a decision that the Biden administration has to make on LNG by rail. So can you give everybody a quick update on the project and just what we're expecting from the Biden administration, and I think it's the Department of Transportation specifically, yeah?
Sure. Yeah, I'd love to. Thanks, Thomas.
Yes. So as noted in the film, we are waiting for Biden to take action, and specifically, we want him to reverse the decision that was made by President Trump. Right. And when Biden was elected, so many of us felt like that was the end, or we were told that was the end of the Trump reign of terror. So this is a moment in which Biden can truly distinguish himself as a break from that moment that we were all kind of, waiting to see what Trump would do to further damage our environment. In particular, Trump got or allowed New Fortress Energy to be able to transport LNG by rail, and kind of did this as, a millionaire doing favors for other rich white men who are going to come through our communities and damage them. So we're asking Biden to reverse that. So we're waiting on the regulation to come through. And recently we had the opportunity here in New Jersey to talk to Secretary Buttigieg. He was here talking to Andy Kim, one of our congressmen, and we were there bird dogging and told him he needs to take action on this. So lots of pressure, and again, still waiting, but we're not waiting without action. So we're doing a lot of grassroots organizing. We're fortunate to have wonderful volunteers, and we've passed, I believe, 14 resolutions in Southern New Jersey on the municipal level, enough that eventually New Fortress Energy, a billion-dollar company, started going to these local government meetings and feeling like they needed to make presentations about the project. So we really turned up the heat, and we're continuing to do that. A lot of outreach in the communities, and again, a lot of pressure on the power holders who can reverse this decision. So, we're waiting for them to do the right thing, and we're also applying pressure and again, mobilizing on the grassroots.
Awesome. Thanks, Kate. Yeah. And I know there was a big event in New Jersey today as well, targeting the governor. So lots of work happening on a lot of different levels. And Fairman, Kate, referenced some of the organizing that's happening on the New Jersey side of the river. Wonder if you could share more about what your organization has done and what you're doing in Philly to organize people opposing the LNG by rail and just to involve the community there.
I'm sorry. We were Delaware River Keepers. We're part of an organization with different groups. And I represent my group, which is Philly Boricuas. And in our group, basically, it has a lot to do with the situation of Puerto Rico's status. It has to do with us being a U.S. colony and how we can't decide our fate. And because a lot of this LNG and New Fortress Energy actually has a port in San Juan, Puerto Rico. And so when they have that port there is to export the LNG from this area, the Philadelphia, coming from Wyalusing, Pennsylvania, to be passed around to the city of Philadelphia, the city of Camden, to reach the port in Jersey in Gibbstown. And it has a lot to do with our colonial situation. It has a lot to do with us not being able to decide our own fate. And there are many organizations working alongside with us with Philly Boricuas. There's one, especially in Puerto Rico, called Queremos Sol, which means we want sun. And they're promoting rooftop solar. And basically, they've tried many different projects to promote, whether it's natural gas or LNG, in Puerto Rico, and people are rejecting it. And the same thing we're trying to do here is educate people that this has a lot to do, with keeping us down, for us not to decide our own future. And so we educate people here, making sure that we educate people by try to pass resolutions, getting rid of the special permit that they want to allow this LNG to pass by rail. It is so dangerous, as I said in the video, and the numbers of people. There's major hospitals, major universities. Temple University is where that rail line passes by. It's also St. Christopher's Hospital for Children is in that area. And we got to make sure that we educate people to realize that we do have the resources to transform our economy to cleaner energy. There is enough, natural resources, whether it be lithium, whether it be silicon, which is 1/4 of the world's crust is silicon, to go into renewable energy. We need to educate people to realize that we have to have a plan for basically, you know, how we can recycle reused panels and stuff like that, you know, and make sure that we maintain supply chains and not destroy them. You know, if we have a summit of the Americas, we invite everybody so everybody has ideas. You know, we need to be a leader and not fall behind with what the rest of the world or where the rest of the progressive world is doing. All right.
Great, thank you so much. Yeah, it's great to hear about the connections, not just between Pennsylvania and New Jersey, but even between Puerto Ricans in Pennsylvania and on the island. Moving down the supply chain, as it were, or upstream. Russell, we heard a little bit of reference of the noise that Senator Manchin and others have been making about Mountain Valley Pipeline, but I wonder if you could just give everyone an update on where things stand and specifically what we're pushing President Biden to do.
Yeah, absolutely, Thomas. Thank you so much. Thanks to everyone on this panel. What an incredible experience to be here with all of you. The mainline Mountain Valley Pipeline is a massive, incomplete, segmented, and soon to be stranded and abandoned methane shipping line. It would deliver fracked gas from Wetzel County up in northern West Virginia to connect into the Transco system in Pittsylvania County in southern Virginia. But thanks to Black, Brown, and Indigenous organizers and allied advocates from primarily rural areas, MVP was stopped from continuing on into North Carolina through their proposed Southgate extension. Those organizers down there resisted and rejected permits to pollute the air and water of communities along what would have been 75 more miles of pipe. The mainline project has lost twice 2 key federal permits that would have allowed them to cross national forest and pollute endangered species habitat. These are projects that are in deep trouble, and we will take every opportunity to stop them once and for all. No matter what you read or hear in the media, no pipeline is inevitable, and MVP is as far from ever shipping methane as they were when the project was announced in 2014. Only half, as the film mentioned, of the 303 miles of the pipeline are finished to final restoration. And if MVP were to try to ship gas today, they could only go 3/4 of a mile before reaching the first of hundreds of incomplete stream and river crossings here in these Appalachian Mountains. So the president, the agencies that he oversees, they know the science. They know MVP would be disastrous for our climate, the water, and the ecosystem that we all share. I'm so thankful for everybody that is tuned in here tonight, because it's going to take all of us to remind him every single day that the era of fossil fuel expansion is over, and that by declaring a climate emergency, we can immediately begin working toward a just, equitable, and healthy future. I would encourage everyone to join that effort from wherever you are by visiting stopmvp.org. Sign up for our action alerts through our newsletter and support this growing coalition from these mountains to every community that's represented in this film and everyone downstream. So thank you again, Jon. Thanks for this film. Thanks for everybody from all these frontline communities for speaking so powerfully to these issues and for connecting our communities, really, adding our voices to the global call for climate action.
Thanks, Russell. And yeah, that's a great reminder that because President Biden is the decision maker, or can be the decision maker on some of these permits for MVP and for exports and for the LNG by rail rule. Everybody, regardless of where you are in the country, can have a role in pressuring him, pressuring the White House and the administration. So my colleagues, I think, has been putting some links in the chats. We have some easy ways for people to send a message to the White House or send a message to the Department of Transportation. There's obviously lots more that can be done, but make sure that you take a minute to send those messages this evening. And like Russell said, also stay up to date on what the individual organizations in the film are up to. Great. So I think, John Beard, I've got a question for you. So we heard from, or we saw some clips, I should say, of Secretary of Energy Jennifer Granholm. And I know that you've had some interactions with her a couple times in the last couple of years. I wonder if you could share just a little bit more about kind of her role, what we've seen from her over the last year and a half, and then what your conversations have been like, when your couple run-ins with her.
Yeah, so thank you, Thomas. Yes, we've had the great fortune to meet with Secretary Granholm on 2 occasions. One was at COP26 in Glasgow, Scotland, just this past November, and more recently in Houston, Texas, at the CERAWeek conference. And both times, well, just before I go into that, what you have to understand is that the Secretary sets energy policy for the nation. She is the one that determines how we're going to move forward with whatever that energy policy is, whether it's expanding the petrochemical industry or whether it's easing us into a transition and easing us out of the petrochemical age into an age of clean, green, renewable, fossil-free energy. But as I've noticed in her comments at both of those occasions at COP, as well as here in Texas, that she seems to lean quite strongly and is quite favorable toward the petrochemical industry. And that's very disconcerting to us here on the Gulf Coast, from Brownsville all the way to Florida, and in numerous points in between, like Freeport, Texas, Port Arthur, Texas, where I am now, and also Lake Charles, Louisiana, and St. James Parish. All of these communities are affected by that policy. And everything that seems to be coming from Granholm's mouth is to be very gracious and facilitating toward, or as she said, wanting to not make these companies feel like they were against them. But you're going to have to choose a side. Either you're going to be for the fossil fuel industry or you're going to be against people, because this is about the people versus fossil fuels. What's happening in these numerous communities, as you saw in the movie, excellently portrayed exactly what's going on and how it's affecting people in their communities. And that's not just, it's not good, and it's not proper. And it's also affecting the entire world as we look at now doing these exports to other countries. So in talking to Granholm, she largely demurred the fact that her agency has so much power and capability. And that's very disconcerting, because one of the other things I know about this, being a student of government, is that she takes her orders from the head of the administration. And that head is Joe Biden. So once again, Joe Biden is back in the spotlight. Granholm is doing exactly what Joe Biden says. And how can she do that, or how can he even do that if he says that he's going to be the environmental president? So we're going to have to make him match the talk that he gave with the walk that he needs to walk to protect communities in America, from Appalachia to the Gulf Coast, the Eastern Seaboard, all the way to the West Coast. He's going to have to do a better job of addressing this climate emergency. And he can do it with the stroke of his pen. He can do it with a number of edicts. And he started out quite well in the beginning, but now he's extremely reluctant seemingly to do anything that's going to help us. Well, we elected him, not the fossil fuel companies, the people did. So now it comes down to this, the people versus fossil fuels. And the people are going to win, whether Granholm helps us or not. And matter of fact, we've invited her. And if she's listening, we'd like to invite her to come now to the Gulf Coast and see what's going on here. Because you can't sit in meetings with the fossil fuel industry and ignore the people who make your job possible and who make this nation possible. So we want her to come on down and see it for herself, and then tell us what she thinks and see what type of decision she and the administration are going to make.
Yeah, well said, John. And I know Granholm was actually meeting, I believe, at the White House today with several of the major oil and gas companies to talk about these darn gas prices. So certainly would wish that the same attention and diligence be paid to the communities that are impacted by the industry. Like you said, I know the invitation has been extended many times to her and other members of the administration to visit Port Arthur and and other places that are impacted. Thank you, John. Moving north now to Iowa. Jessica, we heard from you a bit in the film about the fight against the pipelines. I know that my colleagues in Iowa and some other folks who are on the call have had a very busy winter and spring now on that front. So I wonder if you could just give us a quick update on kind of where things stand and what's been going on in the last few months of that fight.
Okay, thanks so much, Thomas, and thanks to everyone who's watching and caring about this issue and giving all their work and their heart toward this. So as you heard in the film, there are 3 different networks of CO2 pipelines that are headed across our state so far. And it's Summit Carbon Solutions, Navigator CO2 Ventures, and Wolf Carbon Solutions. But what's unique about our situation in Iowa is that we have farmers and environmentalists. We have Republicans, Democrats, and independents working together, people who are concerned about climate change, others concerned about safety, others about fundamental property rights. And our coalition is very, very broad. We've found ways to accept our differences and unite toward a common cause. And this makes us feel very powerful. It gives us hope and courage because we know that we're stronger when we're standing shoulder to shoulder with our neighbors. And so despite the fact that over the winter and the spring, our hundreds of phone calls and emails this legislative session resulted in not a single bill being passed that would protect us, which is why I'm running for state senate now to change that. Despite that, we continue to believe that we can win. So for example, Summit Carbon Solutions needed easements on about 3,500 parcels of land. That's a lot of land in Iowa, and they have been aggressively pressuring landowners for these easements to build their pipelines. But because we ourselves have been getting the word out and standing together and supporting each other, almost 3,000 parcels have had owners who have refused to sign an easement. 3,000 out of 3,500. And last week, the Iowa Utilities Board noted in a report that if they have to trigger eminent domain on all of those parcels of land, a process in our state that requires an actual visit by the Utilities Board to each property in question, it would take, they reported, about 12,000 hours of work. That's about 1,500 working days before the process could be completed and the Iowa Utilities Board could even rule on the project to accept or to deny the building of the pipeline. So 1,500 working days, that's over 5 years of these board members coming to each of our properties and visiting. So the pipeline companies will not be able to wait that long and remain profitable. By then, the 45Q tax credits, which are fueling these projects, will have actually expired. So we feel very powerful, and each individual farmer or grandmother or conservationist will have made a difference and potentially change the tide on national energy policy because this CO2 pipeline infrastructure is being built out from Iowa all across the nation. So we do need your help. However, we really need your help to get the word out by raising this issue to our state legislature in Iowa and also to our federal government. Of course, that's what the film is for. But I just want to let you all know we can win this fight. We can do it by standing together. We can do it by joining with our neighbors and discovering everything that we hold in common and everything that we hold that is dear to us. We just need more people to join us. So please join us in Iowa, join us all across this country. And I just want to thank everyone who's been involved in this film and in all of the work and the blood, sweat, and tears that go into everything that we're doing to help with the situation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jessica. And yeah, that's a great reminder. I think Joy and others have mentioned it too. It's when we come together across differences that we're really, really powerful, and the companies start to get scared, and politicians have to really listen. So another good reminder, we mentioned some ways to take action, and we'll share more later. But the film itself is now a great tool to engage members of the community in whatever way you connect with people, to educate people, share these incredible and powerful stories, and get people involved in these different issues. So we'll be following up, and I'll share more at the end. But the film will be available for free on YouTube to use. So yeah, we hope that it's a tool that's used a lot in many different ways going forward. Let's see, Sandra, I think has just joined us. So we heard from John Beard a little bit about Secretary Granholm. She's been a big booster of LNG and other exports, but also, as we heard, a big booster of carbon capture. And I think you did an excellent job of kind of laying out the flaws, punching some holes in the argument for carbon capture. But I think it's worth digging into a little bit more and laying out, especially for people who are, primarily concerned about climate change, why is it important for climate activists and people concerned about these issues to oppose carbon capture and to really stand up to this sort of pillar of the industry.
Happy to. Hi everyone. I'm Sandra Steingraber. I'm wearing sparkles because I just came from a Pride event. So happy Pride, everyone. And I'm so jazzed to talk after Jessica. I really think that fight in Iowa is winnable, and it's an amazing coalition that Jessica and others have put together to fight against the false mirage that is carbon capture and storage. And I feel that we can use the victory there to kind of really expose this boondoggle and sham for what it is. So essentially, I think we don't need to reinvent the wheel to come up with a critique of carbon capture and storage for those of us who are in the climate movement. Essentially, the three critiques that Rachel Carson offered us against petrochemical pesticides in 1962 still applies today. So we can just reprise the Silent Spring argument against carbon capture and storage. And that is essentially a three-part argument that Rachel Carson put forth about pesticides, namely they're dangerous, and two, they don't work very well anyway, and no surprise because three, they were never invented for the purpose for which they were being turned. So just to kind of review, when she wrote about pesticides, she was referring to the aerial spraying of inherently toxic substances, basically poisons like DDT, that were kind of a barrage of poison thrown against the whole ecological life support system. They were killing wildlife and birds. They were causing cancer and birth defects in people. Levels were building up in people's bloodstreams. They were disrupting their endocrine systems, killing livestock. It was a form of toxic trespass. And then, so that was, part of what she argued, laying out the case for harm. And then, but she also pointed out that the public was assuming these risks to their health that they didn't consent to, which was bad enough, but insult to injury, that massive pesticide spraying actually doesn't work to control pests as advertised, because you simply breed resistance just the way you do with overuse of antibiotics. And then second, you're killing off all the enemies of the pest, like bats, birds, spiders, frogs. And then you just get these giant, worse pest outbreaks. So I think that's the argument that we can use. Oh, I guess, and then three, why be surprised that they don't work? Because DDT and other chemicals were never developed to kill Canadian thistles in cornfields. They were actually developed as weapons of war under wartime secrecy, and they were used to halt a typhus epidemic in Italy and then malaria in our troops in the Pacific theater. And then they were brought home from the war and then turned to these purposes for which they were never intended, and there was no testing for safety. So that whole argument can just be taken wholesale and just take out pesticides and put in carbon capture and storage. So carbon capture and storage is dangerous to the public. It actually, in the capture process, makes local air pollution worse because it takes energy to suck the carbon out of a emission stream and a smokestack, and that energy is provided by gas-fired turbines. And so it's only the CO2 that gets captured. All the other air pollution goes right into the air. And that includes all the upstream methane emissions to run the capture equipment. So air pollution gets worse for the communities in which the carbon is captured. That's an environmental justice issue because indigenous, impoverished, low-income communities of color, that's who lives near the smokestacks. And then the other reason it's harmful is because once you liquefy the CO2 and put it in a pipeline, pipelines can break and they can leach. And CO2 is an asphyxiant, but also, and just as importantly as suffocating us if we breathe a lot of it in, if these pipelines rupture in our community, CO2, when it hits water, turns into carbonic acid. And so if you breathe in a lot of CO2, it will start to dissolve you from within. And cause liver damage, lung damage, kidney damage, and so forth. And this isn't new to you. We all know this already, because when CO2 dissolves in ocean water, it acidifies the ocean. That's why we're losing marine life. That's why shark skin is dissolving, and we don't and barnacles and coral reefs are having trouble, because we're dissolving creatures with shells. Shells are made of calcium carbonate because CO2 turns into carbonic acid. It does the same thing inside our bodies. And so one strong message I think we can take to the communities where these pipelines are planned is that if they leak in the middle of the night, it's like carbon monoxide. It doesn't smell, there's no odor, and it will start to asphyxiate you and cause permanent organ damage because it will acidify you. Also, you can't really save yourself by evacuation, get rescued by ambulances or fire trucks, because CO2 displaces oxygen, and so those same vehicles will that need to rescue you will also rely on oxygen for internal combustion engines, and they will sputter to a stop, so you can't get out. So I think these are messages we can bring. And then finally, where you store the CO2, if it leaks into groundwater, it will acidify the groundwater that people drink. And also acidification allows other heavy metals and radioactive substances to get into the drinking water. So, and then secondly, it doesn't work. It doesn't really capture a significant amount of carbon dioxide, and it doesn't capture methane at all. In fact, more methane is needed to run the carbon capture equipment. So we're leaving out one of the two main greenhouse gases in the accounting. And then finally, third, why be surprised? Because it was never designed to solve the climate crisis. Carbon capture and storage was designed by the industry to be used to get more oil out of stubborn places where oil doesn't flow freely. Because if you pump depleted wells full of CO2, you can get some of the sticky oil to come to the surface. So carbon capture and storage was designed to help get more oil out of the ground. And in fact, 80% of carbon capture and storage is still used for that purpose. And so you're going to burn that oil that otherwise would have stayed in the ground. And the CO2 emissions from burning the oil that was gotten out by the captured carbon, that's not part of the accounting system either. So again, I think it's a three-part argument. One, it's really bad and harmful and dangerous to public health and safety. Two, it doesn't really work to capture any significant amount of carbon and hold it in the ground. And then three, why would we be surprised that it doesn't work very well? Because it was never intended to do that. It's actually just a thing the oil industry came up with so it could get more oil out of the ground.
Thanks so much, Sandra. And I think, yeah, that's a key point, I think, for climate activists and people who are have some experience dealing with the fossil fuel industry. Is like, this is actually a part of their plan to sort of extend the life of the oil and gas industry mostly, and even worse, to extract more oil and gas. And so a critical piece of the puzzle as we, hopefully transition is to push back against these schemes and the industry talking points, which are unfortunately being parroted by the Biden administration at this point. Jean, I have several questions for you, but I think we'll start with one that I think maybe was not mentioned specifically in the film, but that is one of the demands of the coalition, which is for the Biden administration to use all of their authority, not only to stop fossil fuel projects, but to kind of drastically ramp up renewable energy production. And we actually had a big win on that a couple weeks ago. Tell us more.
Okay, so everybody should feel really excited that we actually had a big win on climate that happened around 2 weeks ago. So the big win that's part of this climate emergency set of pillars that we have is for the president to use a statute called the Defense Production Act and basically ramp up renewable energy. And we're talking about solar, heat pumps, insulation, and deploy that across the United States. And the thing that we were all fighting for in particular is not only using this type of like urgent wartime footing to actually move our transition along, but make sure that it is just. And the White House actually committed in their orders to deploy solar heat pumps and insulation to environmental justice communities first as a priority. There's a way that they can do that by planning that ahead, and they actually committed to doing that planning. So this is just incredible news in a lot of ways, because it actually is the first time that we're seeing the Biden administration actually use their executive powers in a way that we have all been asking him to do in the last year. And the most important part about this is that it signals this huge sea change right now for the presidency. They have continued, they've kind of used their executive powers for evil, for fossil fuels, but we see they're now turning it towards renewable energy. But on top of that, they're not just relying on the Build Back Better Act anymore. Many people, are crying out saying, if we don't pass this Build Back Better Act, the world is going to blow up and we're all going to die, which, take it for what you will. But actually, outside of legislation, the president has a huge, huge amount of power. And he has just used that for good for renewable energy. And he needs to keep going by shutting down fossil fuels. He absolutely has the ability to do that within his pocket, as Jon was saying, with the stroke of his pen. That means stopping fossil fuel infrastructure permits. It means stopping the crude oil exports from being exported and letting our Permian Basin flourish as the biggest carbon bomb in the world. So these are all things that he can do. We just cracked open the door together, and it's only upside from here, and we got to keep going.
Very well put. Yes, it is an exciting step forward, and hopefully a sign of more action to come. But it's going to take a lot more work from us and much more from President Biden as well. So thank you, Jean, and thank you to everyone. I think a lot of organizations pitched in the last few months to push that demand specifically. And again, it's proof that we can make progress on these things. Well, great. I am so glad that we were able to hear from so many people who were in the film. We're missing a few. I know that Carolyn Raffensperger was featured. Sharon Levine, I know, is at another event this evening and weren't able to join us. But you heard from them in the film, and like I said, I hope that the film is used, and shared far and wide beyond this. So Jon Bowermaster, the director, I think we had a little bit of a camera glitch, but was hoping that you could share, just a little bit more about how you hope the film is used and kind of where it goes from there now that it's out in the world.
Thanks, Thomas. Yeah, that's very funny. Previously, I was just my bookcase was on the camera, and now having to come up with some still image of me. I'm quite sure I should be the one on top of technological connections, and obviously that failed. Well, that was fun. I was super glad that everyone who was in the film could come and join us. I'm a big believer that media can make a difference, which is kind of imperative since I'm in the media industry. And I hope that as we continue, now that we have this tool, I hope we can share it. What I would ask from folks still tuned in is that if you have thoughts on I think sharing online is great. And I think Thomas probably will turn you on to a YouTube link where you can share this, the film going forward. But I'm also a big believer that personal screenings and neighborhood screenings and home screenings and stuff are really powerful, because then you get to meet your neighbors, who's on your side, and you get to reach out to people who you might not otherwise meet. So I would encourage any of you who want to use the film to organize a screening at home or in a community center or in a church and wherever to do that. I'll reiterate what I said at the top, is that I just feel we're really lucky in this film and in the movement overall. I think we're really lucky to have such articulate, smart, committed spokespersons who continue to fight this fight. I often don't know where you get the optimism and the hope to get up every day and go back out there and make these same arguments over and over and over again. But I'm extremely proud and happy that you are out doing it. I know, Thomas, maybe you have a clue as to where the best place for folks to find a link so that they can share the film. You can always write to me. It's Jon, Jon, at oceans8films.com. I'm happy to help. I would love to come and bring the film to your community, et cetera, if we can organize that. You can certainly find a way to share it online. There's a million options. Sandra, always great to see you, of course. I do recognize that sparkly dress, though. I remember when we filmed Dear Governor Cuomo in 2012, I think that was a purchase of the day. So maybe I hope we're not still making in 10 years from now, Dear President, God knows who, and we're all showing up on the same stage. I hope we're able to figure this stuff out in the interim. Big shout out to Food and Water Watch and the Indigenous Environmental Network and Center for Biological Diversity and People versus Fossil Fuels, et cetera, who supported this project and who will continue to push it out. So I'll leave it to you guys to, Thomas, to advise how people can find the film going forward.
Yeah, thanks so much, Jon. I believe something was just put in the chat to watch the film. Like I said, it's available for free on YouTube for sharing, and we will also follow up with folks over email. And I think there's another link specifically if you want to get a toolkit, a short guide for, like Jon said, organizing a screening, at your home or in your community. We put together a guide with some tips for a successful event, some more information about the folks and the organizations featured, and just a package of things to help you do that. So that is, an easy thing to do. The link is going across the screen there. And like I said, if you signed up for this event this evening, you'll get an email afterwards with some more details. So I did want to mention one other thing, which is, like we mentioned, this event is really just a snapshot of the work that's been going on for many years in many different places by many people. And that's what it's going to take for us to win on all these fights. If you go to peopleversusfossilfuels.org, you can find a kind of a full list of ways to take action. So we mentioned, opposing leasing on federal lands and waters, stopping projects like the Mountain Valley Pipeline, oil and gas exports, the Formosa plastic plants, and others. So there's more information, peopleversusfossilfuels.org/actions. We put together a whole list there. You can also access the toolkit that I mentioned for hosting your own screening. Again, thank you all, so much for joining, and I hope that again you'll use this evening as really just a jumping off point. And thank you again to the folks in the film for joining us this evening. I'm going to pass it over to John Beard, who's got a crew with him there to wrap us up.
Yes, thank you, Thomas. First of all, let me thank you again for hosting this and bringing us to this place and point to be able to view the film. My thanks to Jon Bowermaster for allowing me to participate in it and to work with me and my community in producing this, and also to my colleagues who are on this film with me, those people who are out there in the trenches doing the hard work, organizing, bringing people together, sharing their stories, because you're important to this fight, each and every one of us. It's going to take all of us together, working together, arm in arm, hand in hand, to make a difference, to turn this thing around. And what we have to do, and this film so eloquently places it, it puts the burden on Joe Biden. It's been said that we don't do these things because they're easy, these choices, making these types of decisions. We do them because they are hard. And the hard choices have to be made now. And Joe Biden himself has said that now's the time for courage and the ability to make those decisions. Well, Joe, we're waiting on you. It's been a while, and we need your help. We need you to be the climate president, the environmental president you said you were going to be. And from where I come from in Texas, if a man tells you something, that's his word, and his word is his bond. So we expect you to keep your word. And we want you to know this in terms of what we're doing here in Texas, in Appalachia, on the eastern coast, on the Gulf Coast, and all the way to the West Coast. Because we know the sea level is rising, but so are we. We are going to be rising. And what we want to do is rise up and tell you, Joe Biden, that we expect you to do the job you were elected to do. We expect you to be that climate president. We expect you to use the power of your pen and that bully pulpit to save not only this country, but save the earth, to stop the progress of fossil fuels and its use, to reduce the amount of dependence on fossil fuels by transitioning to clean, green energy, and to also usher in that age by creating incentives for green energy so that we can save the planet and our children and our lives can have a future. You have the power to do this with the stroke of your pen. Use the Defense Production Act. Use the tools at your disposal. You've got plenty in your toolbox. Joe, it's time to go to work. Let's go get it. And if you do, you'll have us behind you working with you all the way. So put it to work, Joe. Let's go.
Very well said. Very well said. Thank you, John. Thank you, everybody there in Port Arthur. And with that, we'll close it out. Thank you all for joining. And please join us in the movement. Get involved however you can, wherever you are. Thanks so much. Have a good evening.